In 1978, a young couple named Ian and Fiona MacLeod moved into the isolated stone cottage near Loch Marie in the Scottish Highlands. The area was known for its misty lochs and ancient forests, as well for its legends. The cottage itself was modest but sturdy, with ivy climbing its weathered stone walls and views of the wild landscape surrounding it. It was the perfect retreat for the MacLeods, who were hoping for a fresh start after a difficult year in the city. They were warned by the locals that the Highlands had their presences, but to the MacLeods it all seemed like a myth, part of the Highlands' wild allure. Their first weeks passed peacefully, filled with long walks along the loch and quiet evenings by the fire. The only oddity was an ancient, slightly warped mirror they found tucked into the corner of the bedroom. Fiona wanted to move it out, but something about it seemed immovable, as if it belonged to the house. One evening, as Fiona laid in bed reading, she heard a faint whisper. She froze, straining to listen, but the whisper faded, leaving only the ticking of the old clock on the wall. She brushed it off, thinking it must have been a trick of the wind blowing down from the mountains, but the next night the whisper returned, clearer this time. Help me. The whisper was soft, almost pleading, coming from a direction she couldn't quite place. Fiona shook Ian awake, but by the time he stirred, the sound had stopped. Ian laughed it off, teasing her about Highlands ghost stories, and went back to sleep, but Fiona was uneasy. The following nights the whispers grew louder and more insistent. Sometimes she would catch fragments of words. Please, or don't leave. But they were faint and muffled, as if coming from far away, just on the edge of hearing. Fiona tried to ignore it, but the whispering followed her from room to room, faint but persistent. It began to keep her up at night, a relentless murmur she couldn't escape. Then one evening, as Fiona was preparing for bed, she caught sight of something in the mirror in the bedroom. At first she thought it was just a shadow, but as she looked closer, her blood ran cold. In the dim light, a woman's face stared back at her. Not her own reflection, but a pale, sorrowful face with hollow eyes and dark, tangled hair. The woman's mouth was moving, as though she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Fiona stumbled back, calling for Ian, who rushed in, but by the time he looked, the face was gone. That night, Fiona lay awake, listening, afraid to close her eyes. The whispering was louder than ever, filling the room like a soft chant, repeating the same desperate phrase, "Help me, help me." In the morning, she confided in an older woman at the village shop, someone who'd lived in the Highlands her whole life. The woman went pale when Fiona mentioned the whispers and the face in the mirror. That cottage, the woman said in a hushed voice, used to belong to a young widow named Moira McAlpin. She lived there alone for years, and folks said she was waiting for someone, though she never said who. She was found dead in that cottage, in front of the mirror, as if she'd spent her last moments staring at something only she could see. Fiona's skin prickled as the woman continued. They say her spirit never left. People who lived in that cottage before you, well, they heard her too. They moved out not long after. Desperate for answers, Fiona and Ian returned to the cottage and decided to search for any trace of the mysterious woman's belongings. In the attic, hidden behind dusty crates, they found an old journal wrapped in cloth. The cover was faded, but inside were the handwritten entries of Moira McAlpin. Most of it was ordinary, daily notes, bits about the weather, but toward the end the writing became erratic, almost frantic. The last few pages were filled with desperate messages, all addressed to the mirror. Moira wrote about seeing things in it, about a face that was not her own, about voices that whispered to her at night calling her name. The final entry read, "I am trapped. I can't escape. Please, help me. At night, Fiona couldn't sleep. She felt like she was being watched, an overwhelming presence that filled the room. As she turned to look at the mirror, she saw Moira's face again, clearly this time. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her mouth moved soundlessly, her expression pleading. Help me. Fiona ran to Ian, shaking him awake. They quickly agreed that they couldn't stay another night. They packed their bags in silence, feeling the weight of the woman's eyes on them, following them as they left. They abandoned the cottage that very night, driving through the fog-covered roads until they reached a nearby inn, where they collapsed, exhausted and shaken. They never returned to the cottage, and it sat empty for years. Locals say it still remains vacant to this day, avoided by even the bravest souls. And every so often, people passing by on foggy nights claim they see a figure standing in the bedroom window, a woman with dark hair staring out at the world with hollow eyes, forever waiting for someone to help her escape.